am pleased to introduce our speaker for this evening. Our speaker is Julie Stevens, and Julie is an associate professor in the Department of Landscape Architecture at Iowa State University, where she teaches planting design and biodiversity focused courses. Additionally, she has developed an innovative multi-year partnership with the Iowa Department of Corrections to create therapeutic nature-based environments for prisons. The team of Iowa State students, prison staff, and incarcerated individuals at the Iowa Correctional Institution for Women received the Award of Excellence from the American Society of Landscape Architects in 2015 and 2018. Professor Stevens is developing a trauma-informed design program focused on vulnerable and underserved children and adults. Along with her students in a transdisciplinary studio, she is improving the lives of children through the healing powers of nature at youth residential treatment facilities. And we are very lucky and happy to have Julie here with us this evening. I'm going to stop sharing and I will let her take over, and I will see you all at the end of the presentation.
Thanks, Alicia. I'm just loving this, watching all of your home areas and your names pop up. This is very, very cool. I'm seeing lots of places I'm familiar with, like Diane and Makokata, my stomping grounds. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. Feel free anytime to put questions in the Q&A, and I think Alicia will keep track of that. Um, so tonight we're talking loosely about why to choose native trees and shrubs in your home landscape or other landscapes that you might be planting and playing in. But we're also going to talk a little bit about some grasses and forbs and other considerations. So I'll get started here. This is a really cool image from Brushy Creek State Park and the Prairie Resource Center. So this is a reconstructed prairie. And what you're seeing is my students out clambering around in the prairie and stepping in little wet potholes and things like that. So I have the coolest job on the planet. I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself. So some of you might recognize this. Maybe I'll give you a second. Does anybody know where this is at? This is a drawing by the most amazing Bob Dias, who is one of the godfathers of the Department of Landscape Architecture here and grew up in the same hills that I lived in. So this is, I can't see all the chat and everything right now, but this is Bellevue, Iowa. So I grew up, I'm a Jackson County native. I grew up playing in the bluffs and in the little limestone cracks and crevices and I was a farm kid, but when my parents were busy doing other things, I was in the woods exploring plants and digging them up and bringing them up to the house to show my parents and making little gardens closer to the house so I could really get to know these plants. And lo and behold, it became my entire career, and most of my free time too. So another little thing I wanted to share you, I'm a mom, and that has opened my heart and mind to the wows of nature and the world in ways that I just can't even express. So these are a little bit older pictures, but Magnolia is on the left here, Meadows on the right. So you can see I even bring plant life into naming my children. So Meadows looking at a chicken of the woods mushroom there. She's my mushroom spotter always. Maggie's climbing and they can name more plants than probably most people. I am proud of that. I hope they find their way through other things that they're interested in their life, but we're pretty inundated in plants and nature. Um, so I also want to tell you, we're going to talk about native trees and shrubs. And I know because I've felt this before that we sometimes feel a little bit like, oh, do I have to be an only native person? Can I like other things that aren't native? What if I really like my rose bushes? That's okay. So, this is my house from many years ago, and I'm sure this is a shameful image of my house. But I'm showing you some wins and losses that I've had. There's a lot more than what I'm going to show you tonight, promise. But I'm going to show you some hits and misses. So when I knew enough moving into this house about 14, 15 years ago. I knew which invasives to pull immediately. Burning bush, um, buckthorn, privet, those kinds of things. Honeysuckle. Oh, we're constantly battling honeysuckle. So that was what I started with, and this is what I ended up with. So the house was pretty well covered in plants, and now here we are with some bare space. So um, I will tell you more about what happened here and what's still happening here, but I wanted to lay out that I'm on this adventure with all of you. But let's back up. I'm going to fly through this stuff really quickly, but I'll make sure you have access to the slides so you can dig into this if you want to. But let's first talk about why are we even talking about native plants? Well, because genetic diversity is really important. Because plants evolve and they change and they adapt to the soil conditions, the climate conditions, um, and they're very, very much evolving with other plants and animals and insect species around them. So that's important. And if you're paying attention to this, you know we have a biodiversity crisis on our hands. So the time and place is now to really think about how we integrate more natives into our landscapes. So straight natives, is that a funny word? It is. Sometimes people refer to them as the wild ones. That's how I refer to my second child. So my first child, maybe her name is Magnolia. She's maybe a little more of a cultivar, a little more stays in place. My second child is a typical second child, and she is wild. So these guys are wild. They occur wild. They reproduce without anybody helping them. They have high genetic diversity. So a Liatris punctata that's in northern Iowa is going to be different than a Liatris punctata that's in southern Iowa. Um, they provide nectar, pollen. They provide food sources. They provide habitat, excuse me, for other invertebrates and animals. And they keep evolving. So plants are constantly evolving with other insects and birds. So if you're familiar with Doug Talmay's work, he calls those the little guys that run the world. And I think that's really important. And we kind of know what they do. So we know their ecological value and we understand their relationship with water and soil and other living organisms. What's the problem with exotics? So I also have a whole bunch of terms at the end of this that you can access. So exotics are pretty cool. I have a colleague here who is obsessed with Japanese maples, so I threw a couple of those into these slides. Um, but they may also be pest resistant, but they might not be pest resistant. Um, they also have a tendency, as we've seen with things like honeysuckle, to establish in these foreign ecosystems, like our non-native honeysuckles that are establishing here in Iowa, and they take over our woodlands. They crowd out other species that are important. They don't allow for natural succession, um, and typically are taking more from the soil than they're putting back in. We also don't know a lot about the relationship that exotic plants have to other species. So I like to tell people, I love it when the cedar waxwings come and eat crab apples off my tree, but we're not really sure if those crab apples are as good as the of a food source as the native plant would have been, our native Ionensis, Malus Ionensis, or are they eating Skittles or the equivalent of Skittles? So we just don't understand all those relationships yet. All right, so cultivars. I know so many of you know this, but for those who don't, we're just going to touch on it really quickly. So cultivars, they are created by humans, so they are cultivated. They typically are selected for very specific traits like improved flower color, foliage, size, shape. We love to shrink things. I also have a horticulture degree in addition to my landscape architecture degree. Um, and boy, don't we love to just dwarf plants, right? How many times can we dwarf a mugo pine? But they also are generally cloned, which means that they have no genetic diversity, right? So every clone is the same plant. Sometimes they have sterile flowers and don't produce seed, which we select plants for that particular reason, so they're not creating a mess in our landscapes. But that also means they're not providing any food sources for non-plant species. Okay, nativars. Are you hearing this term? So a nativar is a cultivar of a native plant. There's lots of them. Do we know if they are as helpful in ecological functions as our native plants? No. There's some studies out there that understand maybe a few plants, but unless we were to study every cultivar of Echinacea pallida or Echinacea purpurea against the native Echinacea pallida or purpurea, we just don't know. So we're mostly planting these types of things for aesthetic value. Okay. Why do we love our non-natives so very much? I already told you my daughter's name is Magnolia. I've never met a magnolia that I didn't love. To my knowledge, there's only one native in the state of Iowa, and well, that may be a little bit questionable. Maybe southern Iowa. So we love, like I said, we love to dwarf them. We're looking for colors and flowers. We're looking for the next best thing. Isn't it fun when Monrovia puts out that their next hydrangea cultivar? Um, but we have some unintended consequences, right? So a lot of those plants are not supporting other species, and then we have this sort of market dominance, right, which is decreasing biodiversity. And as we talked before, they can become invasive or noxious. So, why do we choose native plants? On the flip side, they do create food and habitat, some more than others. Not all native plants are going to produce the same amount of food source or habitat. They are adapted, right? They correlate with the climate, with soils, with fungi, with other plants, with other animals. They require less fertilizer, pesticide use, and water. They can also lower the carbon footprint because typically, if we're sourcing native seed sources, we're growing them native, we're buying them native. They're not coming from Oregon or Georgia. All right, here's another thing I love about native plants because I am a frugal person. Do you know how many plants are in this tray? This is a tray of 72 and it's not even full. There's probably somewhere around 40, and I probably paid $4 a piece. So I've got 40 plants here for 160 bucks. Pretty good? I like that, right? I can do almost a whole garden with those, a nice sized garden with those 40 plants. So a lot of bang for your buck. And once they're established, they really take off. Okay, so here we are. We're back to my home landscape. Oh, this gives my husband a heart attack every time I dig into a spot like this. I've got some students out here helping. One of my daughters also out here helping. And you'll see I'm laying down some mulch here. They're laying down some mulch, getting ready to plant all those little teeny tiny plugs. Here they are. The plugs are planted. I don't have all my rocks in around the outside, but working on that. You can see to the right, there's some sedges there that I planted a couple of years ago that have already started to kind of fill in the way that I hope the rest of the beds around the house will. So I'm taking this piece by piece, which I really think is a good, little good tidbit is to try not to bite off more than you can really handle. Okay, so this is one, I call this one of my wins. So if you remember that first picture, I ripped pretty much everything out, at least all the invasives. I kept a few things. I liked the irises, so I left them. They had good color. And I should say the first couple of years we lived there, I also, because I was on a pretty much a budget of nothing as a new homeowner and a new faculty member here, I did a lot of dividing, even daylilies that I'm starting to remove daylilies more and more, but I didn't want empty plant beds. So I did a lot of dividing, moving things around, getting things from friends and neighbors. I have some Siberian iris that I absolutely love that I keep sharing with others and moving and so I'm using what I have and slowly as I'm learning more about how to use these natives in the landscape, kind of transforming space by space. Here's another win. So you saw this picture back here. And here I've got a beautiful little carpinus that I got from Iowa Native Trees and Shrubs over here in Woodward. And I planted this tr bed of Tradescantia right here, if you can see where my cursor is. Look at that. That's 1 year. That's one season from one spring to the next. It's amazing. It's like they just really want to live. Okay, let's talk about some barriers here. Um, Funding. I just said, I was on a budget. I couldn't spend a lot of time. As a new faculty member and now with little kids, it's really hard to find the time. I have found really good success in hiring a few students here and there. Spouses, I didn't approve putting that in there. I hope he's okay with that. But every time I dig up landscape beds, he says, "What are we doing? I thought that one was already done." And I say, no, it's, you don't paint your house once and then leave it for life, right? You have to keep changing and also I keep exploring. It's my living lab. So he's coming around. He understands. Sourcing. So we're going to talk a little bit about sourcing. Where do we even find these native plants? Of course, the cultural norms are probably the thing that are driving this aversion maybe to native plants. So we got to keep up with the Joneses. We want that tidy lawn. We want those trimmed shrubs, boxwoods and, little circles. Those tend to be kind of the typical way of going about it. And like I said, I have a colleague who just can't let go of those Japanese maples, and they sure are amazing. We're going to talk about some design considerations. Um, so I'm in development here. I don't know what happened to my slide, but I'm in development here. Perhaps I'll have this figured out before I retire. But I think we have to remember that these kinds of things are evolving just like the natural world, and we have to be responsive. So if we think of this act of designing and planting as it's a one and done and we're in control of this, then we're probably not going to be as successful as we want to be, but we need to keep evolving. We need to look at designers of the past and present, and what that says on there is to really look at a priority funnel, and we'll talk about that too right now, in fact. So I want you guys to, if you've got a piece of paper in front of you, take a second and put these factors into this is just an example of a funnel. So we're funneling out, and the most important thing to you is at the top. So if you look at these factors, and maybe there's other factors that you have in mind as well, what are the most important things for you? And I'm going to just give you a second to do this. So most important at the top, least important as you go down. And then if you would, in the Q&A, or the chat, whatever is, I guess, Alicia said she'd be watching the Q&A, so you could put in the Q&A, what what's the top priority for you? Or Alicia, you can chime in if you'd prefer it be in the chat.
Yeah, have it be in the chat, not in the
Okay.
Q&A, and that way
So-
we'll keep the true
Yep.
questions to the Q&A. Thanks.
Perfect. So if my responses you want in the chat, we can do it that
Yep,
way.
that would be great.
Okay. So in the chat, tell me, you can give me you can give me your top three, however you want to answer that. But what's most important to you? Let me see if I can see these. Oh yeah, here we go. Oh yeah, 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 I can see that. Yeah, this is great. Oh, I'm gonna need a copy of this. Look at all this data. This is great. Yeah. So, I mean, aesthetics, it matters. And I didn't include any of this in here, but I also have I spent a lot of time working with the sort of environmental psychology aspects of why we like things in a particular way in the landscape. And aesthetics is so important. It actually really goes back to our primal needs as human beings, which is great. Yeah, so this is what we need to do then. We need to marry the aesthetics with the ecological value. And boy, we have a lot of amazing plants in our native landscape. Okay, so let me go. There we go. So here's my funnel. I'll tell you a little story. So that planting bed that you saw, um, I had an area, this is my daughter Meadow again. I had an area here I inherited. It was a lot of lily of the valley. I've put a few other fun little things in there. I've added a few natives. Um, and because my kids are always dragging things around, of course, they brought a whole bunch of common milkweed seeds into the yard, which is fine. So, so the common milkweed starts coming up in this bed, and lily of the valley is, 6 or 8 inches tall, and all of a sudden I have these common milkweeds that are 6 feet tall. And the old school gardener in me, the horticulture student in me, wanted to go out and pull all those common milkweeds out because they just looked so weird with the lily of the valley. And I am so glad I didn't. And every year there's more of them and more of them and more of them. And is it the most aesthetically pleasing space? No. But every year we have watched more and more monarch caterpillars hatch and make their chrysalises. You see those little teeny tiny caterpillars, just like the Hungry Caterpillar book, and they do get bigger. And then we see their chrysalises, and they attach on the craziest things, like the siding on our house. And for to be able to watch the miracles of life and the miracles of nature happen right there out your window is absolutely priceless. So that's the top of my funnel. Let's talk about some other design considerations. So I've been working with, if you can see this, I've been working in my classes, redesigning some of our planting classes to really think more about biodiversity, native plants, supporting ecosystem services. And this book, Planting in a Post-Wild World, is by Claudia West and Thomas Rayner. Claudia West is actually going to be here. I can put it in the chat when we're done with the slides. She's going to be here in a couple of weeks giving a presentation. This book is just really fantastic. And I'll tell you a little bit about how it works. So this is something I have my students do. There's a conceptual framework that they have laid out in this book. And what it's doing is it's really trying to mimic nature by using reference plant communities. And I'll show you an example. But I love this idea, and students love it too, because they really like concrete actions in design education where things are not always concrete. So you're kind of mapping out what you have to work with. What's your existing site? So the middle one here, you have a suburban lawn, scattered trees, busy road. What do you want it to be? You want a woodland edge? Seems impossible when you look around your suburban community and you see lots of lawn and a tree here and there and some very tidy shrubs. So how do you do it? And how do you make it actually look beautiful and aesthetically pleasing? And so what they're talking about here are elements to amplify. These are the designerly types of actions where we might make a grove, or we might use, as you see, drifts or repetition. Um, you may make an alley if you have a driveway or something along those lines. What are some of the other design responses? You know, how are you actually going to create a designerly approach, but still using natives and inspiration from the natural world? And then one that I really love is orderly frames, and we'll talk about that one as also known as cues to care, which is, you know, how do you make it look like it was intentional? Um, okay, so reference plant communities. This image here doesn't look all that exciting, does it? But it is beautiful. So this is at Ledges State Park. This is one of my most favorite reference communities, and one that I really hope to get trialing at home and maybe here on campus. So what you're seeing is, if you can follow this, is a grove of Carpinus caroliniana. So that's our American hornbeam, a beautiful plant. It does really different things in different spaces, right? So when we talk about plant behavior, if you have Carpinus caroliniana growing in a forest or woodland setting with a whole bunch of other plants, it's going to stay skinny. The trunks stay skinny. These are old. They've been here for a long time. They're going to stay skinny. They're going to kind of grow together as a grove, kind of look like an understory. If you see them here on campus or in another urban environment, we tend to plant one plant and give it all the room in the world to get as big as it can. That's okay. They're beautiful that way. They get these really big trunks. I always tell my students they kind of look like an elephant foot. They're smooth, gray, kind of muscly. Um, so those are different approaches to using the same plant. But what I also love here is if it's impossible to see, but on the ground plane is a whole bunch of really neat native Iowa plants. So when we look at these, what we call reference plant communities, we're looking at the species, also the site conditions, right? So this is a southwest facing slope in ledges, so it's hot and dry. It's surrounded by oaks and hickories and cherry trees. That would be its native community, an oak hickory community, which is a common site in the ledges area in central Iowa. Okay, so you've got Carpinus. And then let me show you a few of the other things that you'll see here. So you're going to see, again, this is American hornbeam left to sort of, you know, get to its maturity. You've got this wild ginger, which is just amazing. Native columbine, Dutchman's breeches, and woodland sedges. So, maidenhair fern, wow, what an amazing plant. So now I have a plant palette that I can work with. So I see something in nature, I think, wow, that's amazing. Now, how do I translate that to a design and a plant palette that I can work with? And so this is a strategy that we're working with. So back to Thomas and Claudia's work in Planting in a Post-Wild World. This is directly from their book. They're really one of their other key themes or principles is really to layer that landscape. When I was a student, I learned landscape layers as anything sort of knee height and below, anything eye level and below, anything above the head and overstory, or overstory, understory, shrub, herbaceous. Now, the way they're talking about layers is a little bit different. So they're looking at the structural layer. That could be trees and shrubs. It could also be grasses or perennials that really have a lot of substance year round, like this Joe Pye weed that they've got sketched in here at the top. And then a seasonal theme layer. Those are plants like your liatris and coneflowers that they're showing, which are really going to provide a lot of color and seasonal interest. And then this one is really important, and I don't think we do enough of this. This is the ground cover layer. And again, you saw me using mulch. That mulch is just for establishment. The goal is to not have to mulch. You're filling those beds. Bare soil is aside from maybe supporting some ground nesting bees, bare soil is not what we want to see, right? Then we have, too many weeds. We're doing too much spraying or pulling, but covering the bed, so that green mulch layer. And again, we want to talk about cues to care. So if we go back to this slide here, they're talking about it as orderly frames. And what we're talking about is also called cues to care, which is a theory that was developed by Joan Iverson Nassauer. She was actually a faculty member here for a little while, and essentially it just means that there are indications in the landscape that tell you that it's cared for, that it was designed, that it's intentional, and a lot of times that's just a lawn border. So you'll see lawn borders around prairie plantings. Typically, we want those to be at least 5 or 6 feet. So if, things are falling in to the grass area, there's a place for that to be caught. But also it shows that we care, that we're keeping up with it. It's kind of a way to step into the native landscape, maybe take over some of that lawn that isn't being used for other things and really maximize our planting space. It can also be hardscaping like edging, using boulders or outcroppings, natural rocks and stones, and then repetition. So we teach our students design form space and order. So grids and radial patterns, allays, those kinds of things. We can still use those even if we're using native plants. Not all native plants stay exactly where we want them to be, but many do. So green mulch, let's talk about that for a second. This is a project done by Monarch Gardens. Many of you are probably familiar with their work. They're over in the Omaha area. This bed is looking primarily like a mix of sedges and other small grasses, and it looks like they're probably trying to start some other forbs and things. This is what a green mulch layer would look like without those other, structural and seasonal theme layers. This is really important. And this is something we want to make sure we've got a good green mulch layer established. Um, what I do with my green mulch layer and my herbaceous and grass plantings is I wait until the stem nesting bees have left in the spring, and then I mow right through it. I have a junky old mower. I don't really care if, kind of bangs up the blade, and I just go nice and slow and I kind of knock all those plants down right where they're at. So my seed source falls super easy. I don't have to mulch. I'm keeping that biomass right where it needs to be so I can build some soil. It's not perfect and it's something I'm still playing with and testing. But boy, it sure makes, cleanup in the spring just really easy. And it allows me to keep winter interest up all year as well. So you don't have to just use sedges. You can use other herbaceous plants like the asarum, wild ginger, or geranium maculatum, which is our native geranium. Okay, now I want to switch gears here. Looks like I'm doing okay on time. These are a couple posters I had students make a year or so ago, and I call it plant this, not that. Again, you'll have access to these slides. I can even give you the 11 by 17 versions of these, Alicia, if you want to distribute them. Um, but essentially, what we did is we came up with a few plants that are used a lot. So, using a lot of Buxus microphylla, right? Using a lot of non-native hydrangea species. What could we use instead? And how do I know and where do I get them? So some of my favorites, if you're not familiar with Northern Bayberry, Miracle Pennsylvanica, it's a great shrub. Super tolerant of all kinds of conditions. This is one to use if you've got areas that get a lot of salt and sand. Um, and it is becoming more and more available. It's a semi-evergreen, so it keeps its foliage on through the winter months and it'll drop it in the spring. Changes color a couple times a year, and it's actually where candles were originally made from. Some candles were originally made from. So that if you have the time and energy and you want to pick 1,000 little teeny tiny berries off these plants, you can melt your own wax and make a candle. Fun stuff with plants. So, let's talk about Berberis thunbergii or Euonymus elatus, the burning bush that's everywhere on this campus. It is invasive. It is on the invasive species list. It is what we say, how we like to say it is escaping cultivation. And so we really need to watch this because as the climate warms up, I have a hunch that we're going to see more and more euonymus popping up in our woodlands and other spaces that we don't want them. Oh, chokeberry. So aronia. There's a bunch of different aronias that are native. Um, Beautiful fall color. The berries are edible. I have a friend who makes syrup every year, and my kids go nuts for it. And it's a superfood, so super good for you. Rus aromatica, nine bark, those are great substitutions. New Jersey tea, another great substitution for some of these plants. Oh, there we go. Um, Again, so a lot of Amur maple out there. Amur maple is also on the invasive species list. It's escaping cultivation. It's popping up where it shouldn't. Carpinus caroliniana, one of my favorites. Just stunning. Um, Euonymus atrapurpurea. Did you know we have our own native burning bush? So it's also called Eastern Wahoo or American Wahoo. It's also called Hearts of Buston because the little flower opens up and you can see the little seed. It looks like a little heart, and it's just lovely. So you can kind of peruse some of these other substitutions. I could do 100 of these, 200 of these, and I hope to have the time to do that someday. But I think this is a good step forward, and I really want to plant like this. What do I have in my native palette that I can use? So again, this is a little chance for you to take a second. Go ahead, take a piece of paper and a pencil, a napkin, whatever you want. Sketch out part of your yard or maybe your neighbor's yard that's driving you crazy and think about what's there, maybe what needs to come out. We've talked about a few invasive species. How could you introduce some native plants? And what will be the most exciting time when these plants start going? So I already mentioned, when the monarch caterpillars um, start showing up on our milkweed, it's just amazing. Or when they start making their chrysalises. So just take a little second, sketch some ideas, jot some ideas down, make some notes. What are a couple things you could do?
Yeah, and Julie, if I can jump in while we're letting people have that moment, not necessarily, well, it is a question, but we have a lot of people saying those charts are very beautiful, which I thought when I first saw them as well, the
Oh,
posters that your students created.
yeah.
Is there somewhere that people can get copies of those?
Yeah, if I can I just send them to you?
The physical copy or a link of where
Oh,
they can get
oh
them?
gosh, physical copies. Um, I guess I don't have physical copies printed. We have printed them before for conferences and conference presentations and things like that. I don't know. Maybe, Alicia, maybe you could guide me on the extension side of things if there'd be a way.
Yeah, we can certainly look into it. We can also send people the digital version of it, and they can always take
Yeah,
it to a local printer and get it
yeah,
printed.
yeah, yeah.
Thanks,
Well,
Julie.
I'm glad that there's interest because it's something that I've really wanted to expand. Um, and like I said, there's just a lot of different ways that we could look at subbing native plants in for some of our more common non-natives. Okay, so in the chat, if you would, just tell me a couple things that you're thinking about. That let me see if I can pull that back up. Yeah, there it is. That you're thinking about. What are some things that you could do in your yard, in your neighbor's yard? What are some plants you could swap out? Grow green mulch. Yes, thank you for that. Replace the back. Yeah, you can get rid of your hedge clippers. Native strawberries. We do have native strawberry. I think the berry is so teeny tiny, but a lot of people do use them as a ground cover. That could be a great green mulch. Oh, dappled light in the morning, hard west sun in the afternoon. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I would probably prioritize the hard west sun. Things like geranium really tolerate a lot of that if you're thinking smaller herbaceous plants, trees and shrubs. Lots of our trees and shrubs tolerate sun and shade. I'd have to think about that one a little bit more. Yeah. Yep. Get rid of those. Yes. Get rid of those burning bushes. Yeah, I hate to say it. I've been working on that on campus too. Wild ginger is awesome. Yes, redbud. Yeah, redbud should grow in northern Iowa. Again, if you can find a local seed source or a local nursery, you'd get more of a local ecotype that would be more adapted. Sedges are great. This is great, you guys. Yep, excellent. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, you can keep putting some things in there if you'd like. Okay. So, let's talk real quick about management because I know that came up. Maintenance. I hear it all the time. I want a no maintenance landscape. Hmm. I guess my hope and dream is that not all this is not a comment for all of you because you're here because you love the landscape, but is that we start to understand that being in relationship with the landscape is really important, and that means caring for it. Because in the condition that our landscapes are in right now, they can't care for themselves. But a few things that you can do. This is a phrase my kids think I'm so cheesy. Leaf them be. So do my students. Leaf them be. Do you know what that means? It means leave your leaf litter, leave your plants up, leave them all up for the winter. Don't knock them back until spring. Because there's so many bees that nest in stems. There's so many caterpillars that need that soft landing to complete their life cycle. We come in and tear things up in the fall, then we're just really we're ending the life cycle of so many species way too early. And if they can't complete those very delicate life cycles, we're kind of missing the point. Try to mimic natural patterns. So if you think about, natural landscapes, you don't see just one plant here and one plant there. Occasionally, if you have an oak savanna, for example, you might see a great big grand oak. But really what we're seeing is patterns, right? So allow those beds to expand. Bigger spaces are actually easier to maintain. So if you're dealing with just a little shrub strip around your house or in your front landscape, you're probably making more work for yourself. Allow it to expand. It allows you to kind of open up how you're managing it. And then let's really talk about when do we need to mow or cut something or spray? When do you mulch? So like I said, I mulch when I'm establishing new planting beds, and I do use preen for the first year. And that is really just because I don't have time to go out and pull. and I want to give my little natives all the chance in the world. Um, less worried about things, around trees and shrubs, but I do like to mow heavily in that first, or mulch, excuse me, heavily in that first year. Like I said, I use my mower, junky old mower. That's how I cut my herbaceous stuff down in the spring. What about trees and shrubs? I'd like to start trees and shrubs really small. I know that's not a popular thing to say, but if you look at the studies, if you plant a big, 2.5 or 3 inch caliper tree, or you plant a 1 inch caliper tree, especially from a high quality nursery like Iowa Native Trees and Shrubs, that 1 inch caliper tree is going to catch up to that three inch caliper tree in no time. It's going to have less stress. It's going to be stronger, and the girth of it is going to grow appropriately as it moves up. So try to plant small, especially when we're talking woodies, those trees and shrubs that you don't need to be spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars on big plant material. And then, this is a hard one too. Relinquish some control because, like I did with those crazy common milkweeds that came up all over the place, they have just been an absolute source of joy. Also, I was going to mention if you want more information kind of on how to handle, the invertebrates, I would say, the Xerces Society that's down at the bottom. And I know I think Nikki did a presentation last year for this webinar series, and that would be a great one to go back to. I don't know, Alicia, if you could put that in the chat. I was going to include it in here, and maybe it's in a later slide. Also, you got to beat up these bad guys. They got to go. So, if you're probably looking through this list and thinking, "Oh man, I've got some of these invasives in my yard." And if you're not sure, reach out to an expert and ask. Our extension folks are really great at helping with identification. But I would definitely really try to tackle some of these invasives. It seems like a never-ending battle, but it's one that is worthy of the fight. A few sources I wanted to just throw out here, very close by, Iowa Native Trees and Shrubs here in Woodward, one of the greatest tree and shrub nurseries ever, all, sourced from um, primarily Iowa. Occasionally, Zach will step out of Iowa maybe for something really special. Allendan seed, that should be an E. Allendan seed is in Winterset. They're primarily grasses and herbaceous plants. Prairie Moon Nursery is, oh, they're Minnesota or Wisconsin. They're kind of up there on the line. And Prairie Nursery, I think, is Wisconsin. Prairie Moon Nursery is the go-to for really great information on herbaceous plants and grasses. Um, so if you're looking for just what do I plant, they have just a great filtering system for how local do you want to be. Also, if you're in the central Iowa area, I would encourage you to look at the Ames High Prairie Plant Sale. So um, they're doing some growing with Mike Todd, who's a science teacher up there. The Community Academy, also Mike Todd. So those are two great plant sales that you typically happen in the spring, maybe kind of right around Mother's Day or graduation. Many of you probably know we have the State Forest Nursery Program, which is also right here in Ames. Couple other things. I've got some links here. When you get the presentation, you can click on these. Eastern Illinois has a list of native nurseries that include some Iowa, some Illinois. Iowa State NREM also keeps a list of native nurseries. So these are some good resources to check out. I'd also just say get involved. So check out some of these folks around here that are doing great work. Tallgrass Prairie Center up in UNI is fantastic. Iowa Native Plant Society, they do a lot of activities together. The Iowa Prairie Network, um, Iowa Natural Heritage, I'll let you look through some of these. Um, but I think those are great. So a couple of other things, like I said, for resources, for information, the Tallgrass Prairie Center and the Iowa Prairie Network are great. I would also encourage you just to take a look at E.O. Wilson's Biodiversity Foundation. He's an evolutionary biologist who has he's created a ton of work over his lifespan, but the foundation is really thinking about what he calls the Half Earth Project, which says we need to reserve half the Earth for non-human use. if we want to reverse the biodiversity crisis. Oh yeah, I did put Sarah's talk in here. Of course, our buddy Jeff Isles, who I'm sure you all know and love, like I do, talked about trees and shrubs last year. Those are probably mostly cultivars, and that's great too. So I just wanted to make sure you had a plethora of resources. And we can do this. So this is my friend Bill Johnson up at the Prairie Resource Center talking to students about some of the prairie reconstruction projects. So whether you make little changes in your yard or you do big changes and rip out a bunch of lawn, um, yeah, I think every step that you take is important. And I've got a lot of key terms on here too, but I'd be happy to take questions.
Great. Thanks, Julie. That was a wonderful presentation. We have a lot of good chat going on, good dialogue going on in the chat. People are very excited about this topic and they love it. Um, so let's get to some questions because we do have some really good ones. I have tried to group some of them together,
Okay.
how they make sense. So a lot of people are really interested in the green mulch or the living mulch, and we have a
Yeah.
few questions about that.
Yep.
So the first one is, when do you mow that green mulch? Is it just in the spring, or like what is the timing for that?
Yeah, I typically, most of my areas are, like I said, kind of sedges, some of the, asarum, those kinds of things just die down on their own. The sedges are pretty hardy there and they can get pretty thick. Um, we I just mow them down in the spring and I try and do it before they start greening up. um, which is, I'm not an entomologist. Probably need to consult with some of our entomology folks about timing, a little bit better about timing on how we really support some of those invertebrates in that late spring life cycle or spring life cycle. Um, but I'll also tell you, we had such a hectic spring last year. I didn't even touch them, and they still looked great. There was a little bit of time there where you could see the brown and the green kind of growing in together, but it wasn't long before, the green foliage overtook the last year's, which is again also great for soil building and saved me some time.
Right. Yeah, I know when we're talking to our friends, the entomologists and people like that, they always say, wait longer than you
Yeah.
expect to clean up this stuff. You really need to give those invertebrates time to go through all their natural cycles and then move out of the area and, go out and start foraging and things like that.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that too, because the other thing that's really interesting, if you watch, our native species are so smart, right? They're so adapted here that they don't green up early, right? You're going to start seeing some things with these warmer temperatures that we had, although I see it's snowing, um, that you're going to see our non-natives are going to green up way too early, right? But our natives will stay dormant for a while, which gives you just a little bit more time to let some of those other invertebrates and things take off.
Yeah, it was crazy. I know someone saw some snowdrops already coming out, some spring ephemerals coming out already with
Oh,
this warm weather that we've been having. It's been crazy. But as you said, uh it's white out there right now. So we're firmly back in winter. This is another one. I don't know if you want to touch on this. I know that my turf grass friends have some feelings about this in horticulture. How deep can your leaf litter be before it hurts the grass?
oh, well, so we have these conversations at home too. Um, my general here's my general feeling about lawn. I'm not going to offend anybody. I have a lot of golfers in my family too. Um, Lawn is important where it's actually being used. But if you're not using your lawn and you can convert any bit of it, that's where I'm saying leave your leaf litter. Yeah, we in our lawn areas, my kids also like to play ball, and so we have some lawn areas that we clean those up in the fall. But in your planting beds, leave them as long as you can. In fact, I've last spring I didn't, sometimes I'll mulch over some of those leafy areas too. Um, and I didn't do that last year. All my lily of the valley, everything came up just fine. Nothing struggled through those leaf piles.
Yeah, and I know that some of our turf grass guys would say You can leave some of the leaves as long as you can see through the leaves. You can see
That's
your grass
probably
through the
true.
leaves.
Yeah.
That's a good indicator, and that you always want to mulch or crunch up those leaves before you leave them on the
Yeah.
grass
Yep.
so they're not
Yep.
matting the grass. So just
Yeah.
thinking about some things like that. But like you said, if it's in a border or something where it's truly acting as a mulch, not
Yep.
as much of a concern.
Yeah, and I like to get, the leaves that are on our lawn, I like to get them sucked up in my mulch mower and put on my garden for weed suppression and
Definitely.
yeah.
Yeah, so here's a really great question. I feel like this one has gotten asked before, but I feel like it's one that we don't talk about too much. Is how do you handle spacing when you're putting in some of these plants, native or otherwise? There can be a large range of what it
Yeah.
says on the packet or on the plug. These recommendations, they can really run the gamut and they can tell you, oh, you only need however many inches to 2 feet. How do you figure out how much space you actually need to keep in those
Yeah.
plantings?
I love this question, and it's something I could spend an hour talking on this. Go back to the reference communities, right? This is where you got to take your cues from nature because nature knows. I think about uh, in my backyard, I have this little block of um, uh, mayapple. And, I was thinking, gosh, if I was going to plant that, in the sort of standard design horticulture landscape architecture way, you would plant one every foot or two. But those babies are 6 inches apart, sometimes a little further. But I think that's where we want to draw our cues from nature, just like the carpinus at ledges. That plant can get 30 feet across if we leave it for a long time, maybe 20, 25. Um, but we don't need to give it 25 feet. If I had 25 feet, I'd put 5 or 8 of them in because I want the grove, I want the shade, I want the community, right? I want plants are meant to be in community just like people.
Yeah, great. And that's so funny you said that because actually, when before you started answering the question, the first thing that came to my mind was just a swath of May apples out in the
Yeah,
woods when I've gone
yeah,
hiking in the spring.
yeah.
So
They
we're
know how they want to grow.
telepathically, we're on the same page.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, so also this is a problem, pest nuisance question that we get all of the time. Rabbits. People
Uh-huh.
hate them.
Yep.
Um, and they eat a lot of things. They love, they seem to love everything. Are there native plants that do better against the rabbits that they tend to leave alone?
That's really interesting. Well, I never see them on my grasses. Blue stem, dropseed, sedges, grandmas. Um, Gosh, it's really interesting. I need to think about that more. We also have a lot of deer pressure in our yard, and they don't get into my beds that much. But even if they do, your prairie plants in particular are so deeply rooted. They're made for this, right? They're out there doing their thing and trying to feed the, native fauna. So, the biggest thing I've had is deer rubbing on my young trees. And that's something I could have prevented that, right? I could have put something around them. Um, they've eaten my baby service berries down. Yeah, I think if once your trees and shrubs get big enough, I think most of the natives are probably okay. Of course, they're going to browse. They're not going to kill them. That's the good news. They just, most of our natives are so deeply rooted.
Yeah, I was surprised that the deer didn't come up because that's always the other hot topic.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
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 And so you said something that leads into our next question. You
Mhm.
were saying about the prairie plants and how they're so deeply rooted, and they are they have perseverance like no other. That's kind of their job. That's what they do. And we talk a lot about people wanting to transform landscapes into prairie plantings, right? They want to smother everything, take out everything, all of the grass, and start a prairie planting. But what if you can't smother that grass? What if you can't remove the grass? It needs to be left for some reason. Are there some prairie plants, or how would you successfully start a prairie planting if it has to coexist with some grass already being there?
Ooh, oh, that's a good one. Okay, so couple things. This question has to be answered in scale. So if you're doing a small bed like the one I showed you around my house, um, man, if you can't smother it, this is not, I'll be laughed out of the academic community for this answer, but I have a method of tilling twice, if you can have a tiller, tilling, waiting for it to flush again, tilling again. And that allows also, you don't have to pull all that sod off. It allows you to keep kind of some of that biomass. There's not a lot, but some of that biomass in there. Um, and then you can get your plants in. And again, like I said, I mulch and then I put my plugs in. Now, if you are doing a large scale where you're seeding, there's a whole, our folks in NREM, Adam Jenkins, the guy, they can tell you exactly how to do those big swaths. But I think more and more they're saying, don't remove anything. Do use some herbicide. This is where we do lean into some herbicide. And then mowing if you're doing larger swaths.
Yeah, I thought that was a good question because, like I said, so often people talk about, well, we're just going to smother, we're going to remove all of the grass, whatever we're going to do. We're going to start with a fresh slate. And it's not so often that we talk about, but what if some of the grass still has to stay there? So that's what was kind of interesting about that take on
Oh
it.
yeah, I just always think about homeowners, how many people are able to get rid of so much material, and where do most people go with it? Um, that's not something you throw in your trash cans, and you don't always curbside pickup doesn't happen all the time.
Yeah, good point.